Today, I figure I give you guys a ranking of the Evil Dead series. This is an awesome series of films that started in 1981 and is still technically ongoing to this day. This was always a fun, intense, and gory franchise, one that has always been near and dear to my heart. And I actually think, at least as of now, it has the best track record of any other horror franchise. And what I mean by that is there's just no bad entries in this series yet. All in all, a very fun and very gruesome series that I have always loved. And so without further ado, I figure I'd give my ranking from worst to best. Coming in at number 4 is 2013's Evil Dead. Something of a remake, but technically a continuation of the original series. Evil Dead shows a new group of teens going up to the old cabin in the woods and slowly getting possessed, dismembered, and mutilated by the Deadites and the evil. This is a pretty badass, we'll call it a remake just for simplicity's sake. This is a pretty badass remake, and it is really intense. At no point does it try to just be the original film. It just tries to be its own thing. Here's a new group of teens. Here's a new cabin. Here's some new horrors that await. And it works very well. There are, like I said, slight nods to the original series. And I think, technically speaking, it is a continuation. But it's a very good standalone film in its own right. It does have a lot of really good visuals and gore effects. And it's just a pretty badass and intense movie all around, and it does not hold back. There's apparently even an NC-17 cut of the film, which I haven't seen, but I've heard it's slightly more violent. Still, this R-rated cut is one of the most violent mainstream films I've ever seen, at least in a long time. Absolutely recommended without reservation. The Evil Dead remake is something else, and it's really intense, with great characters that are even better than the ones in the original film. But this film does lack the charm of those earlier films, so I have to put it a little bit lower on the list. But still great, without a doubt. Highly recommended. Coming in at number 3 is 1987's Evil Dead 2. The continuation and sequel to the original Evil Dead film, Evil Dead 2 sees Ash at the same cabin and the horrors continuing throughout the night. Some people think this film is actually a remake of the original, but it's really not. It's a continuation, but it's just loosely connected to the first. They basically, for legal reasons, couldn't show footage of the original film because they had the rights to make a sequel to Evil Dead 2, but not use footage from Evil Dead 1. Just kind of a weird scenario. But essentially, they reshot scenes in the first film, but just with Ash and his girlfriend, and Ash's sister and friends just aren't there. This does get rectified later on in the TV show, but as it stands, it is a pseudo-sequel, pseudo-remake, however you want to call it. The fact is, the movie's great. Released in 1987, this sequel shows Ash again in the cabin trying to fight off the Deadites and survive the night. Look at Bruce Campbell there. Look at his face. Cut up face. This is a good sequel through and through. This is actually most people's favorite, but personally speaking, I do like 2 more films more than this one. But I get people's love for it. It's zany, it's wacky, it's really silly and over the top, but it's a damn good follow-up, and one that will probably go down in history as one of the greatest horror sequels ever made. Coming in at number 2 is 1992's Army of Darkness. This is a badass and hilarious third entry into the Evil Dead franchise. The first film was something of a straight horror movie with slight comedic elements and some unintentional comedy. The second film is a horror comedy, like a mix of the two, and this one is basically a straight comedy with slight horror elements, of course. This is an amazing film through and through. It has Ash going back in time and space, technically, because he ends up in medieval Europe and has to join with the knights and the kings of the time to fight off the, Army of Darkness, which is really just an army of Deadites led by an evil clone of himself, Evil Ash. Look at Evil Ash there. Look at his non-existent face. This is an awesome film and my second favorite of the franchise. A lot of people will put 2 above this one, but honestly speaking, I have a lot more fun with this one. It knows what it is. It's not trying to be overly serious, and it has a great time with that. I absolutely love this film, and I think it's an absolute classic. There's a pretty cool set that I have, too, that includes the theatrical cut, television cut, the international cut, and the director's cut. Highly recommended set if you can find it. I love this sequel so damn much, and it's probably one of my absolute favorite Sam Raimi films, and one that I highly recommend. But none of them are as good as my absolute favorite, 1981's seminal classic, The Evil Dead. This film is phenomenal. Let me give you a little backstory. This film had an extremely low budget of only like $370,000, which wasn't shit even back then. But Sam Raimi took that budget and churned out one of the best horror movies ever made. He didn't hold back. He got really creative with what he had and made a very unique and entertaining and fun film. It's one of the few horror films out there that actually has an NC-17 rating. People backing the movie wanted them to release it with an R-rated cut. But Sam Raimi stood his ground and says, no, this is going to be an unrated, uncut, brutal film. So they released it without a rating, which is just another way of saying, hey, this film is X-rated, or now it'll be NC-17. A really badass film through and through, with great visuals, amazing camera work, a really creepy score, good acting by the cast, although they are very amateurish, but this is the first time movie for both them and the director. But that kind of adds to the charm of this film. It's low budget, it's not super serious, it's kind of campy, it's cheap, but that's what makes you like it so much. That's what makes it stick out so much. This original film will probably always be my favorite of the franchise. I don't see that ever changing. And it's one that I highly recommend and highly suggest anyone watch if they're a fan of horror. A fun and enjoyable franchise, but this is definitely the best entry of that franchise, and one that I highly recommend without reservation. Evil Dead 1. You can't beat it. Well, that's my ranking. And this is definitely, like I said, a series that has always had good entries, and there's a fifth film on the way, and I am excited for that. However, I just hope that it can live up to the standards of the first four. Hell, even if it's as good as the remake, they still will have succeeded in my book. But something else is the original series was continued on. There are comic books and things like that, but they decided to continue where the original series left off with a new TV show, or a newer TV show, Ash vs. Evil Dead. This show lasted 3 seasons and is a pretty badass series through and through. It essentially shows Ash in his older years fighting off the Deadites once again after accidentally resurrecting them. It's a hilarious premise through and through. It really is more in the vein of Evil Dead 2, but it still manages to be a very fun and entertaining series. I don't like it as much as the movies, admittedly, and I do think it's a little too silly at times, but I still highly recommend this show. And I think that it's a favorite horror series they've ever made for TV, and one that I highly recommend. There were also some Evil Dead video games. The first of which, well, technically second, was Evil Dead Hail to the King, which is a really badass and intense action, well, more like in the vein of Resident Evil. It's a survival horror game where you play as Ash and it has tank controls, and you go around finding clues and hidden switches and paths and fighting the Deadites. It's a fun game and very enjoyable, although it's pretty much just a knockoff, admittedly, of Resident Evil, but a pretty fun game through and through. Although it can be a bit clunky, and I really only recommend it to hardcore Evil Dead fans, because otherwise you're just better off playing the Resident Evil games. They're much better, but still pretty fun. There's also 2 games on the PS2 and Xbox. Fistful of Boomstick, which I do own, and Regeneration, which I own as well, but they actually, I have to go find them. I basically have them in my cluttered closet I have to clean out. A very fun series through and through, with good movies, TV shows, video games. It's just one of those series that's always going to be entertaining and fun. Will continue on, I think, through generations to entertain future fans. Thank you all for watching. This has been my video. Somewhat long-winded, I do apologize, but I do love this series. So thank you all for watching once again. Be sure to leave your list down below if you'd like, and peace out.